The first thing that you want to pay attention to before you really start editing your image is to kind of look at your histogram. And basically the way that I think about a histogram, it's kind of like a map or an overview of how your image was exposed. Now your histogram also exists inside of your camera when you're taking an image, especially if you go back to review that image, or you set your camera up so that when you're looking on the LCD screen or through the viewfinder, you can actually see it in there as well. So what a healthy histogram looks like is very similar to what I have here. You want a nice balance from your highlight areas over here on the right side all the way down to your shadow areas here on the left side. And you're going to notice that because this is a color image, you're going to see all these different colors of the RGB spectrum. And if we turn this to black and white, it's all just grays and kind of different tonalities there because it's monochrome. There are no RGB colors. So we're just going to be editing in color. So we're going to leave that alone. Now there are certain circumstances where you might see your histogram look a little different. So for example, if you're shooting in a darker scene, such as like nighttime or where there's just really dark areas, and don't pay attention to the edit I'm doing here necessarily, but look at the histogram, yours might look like this. So nighttime photography, dark lit rooms or things like that, you might notice those things, and that's okay if that does happen because it's in, that's the way it was. That was the scene that existed at the time. Same deal on the brighter side of the spectrum. Sometimes you'll get a look like this if you were in a very bright environment, maybe like a concert and there was some lighting going off, or you're shooting some fireworks. You might have some more of these extremes, and that's okay, but there are ways that we can fix that to try to level things out and make it as neutral as possible. So a couple of different ways you can work with the histogram. It's directly linked to your exposure, your highlights, your shadows, and this whole tone area down here. So if your histogram needs just a little bit of movement, you can either grab the area that you want to kind of slide around, just like so. And that right there was actually just a perfect look. And you'll notice that when I move this, the exposure dial actually moves along with it. So I can actually manually go move the exposure dial if I want. Or if I want to be a little bit more precise on moving my exposure, I can actually just grab the histogram until I have a nice, neat little balance here that I'm overall happy with. And I think about negative 0.30 was looking pretty good. So somewhere right in here. And that's realistically all you need to know, at least right now, for your histogram. And if that all makes sense, you're ready to move on to the next section where we're going to talk about white balance. If you need to learn a little bit more about the histogram, feel free to go back and rewatch this video over again to get a little bit better insight. Now let's take a moment to learn a little bit more about white balance. So what white balance is trying to get that overall look and a neutral look to your particular images. And one of the reasons I said that shooting in RAW format is so important is because it really helps with things like white balance. So for this example, I did have a properly exposed white balance in camera. I shot it for the particular scene that I was shooting for, which was out in broad daylight, about 2 hours before sunset. Now, because I know that I was shooting in daylight, and obviously this scene is so, I could also choose daylight as my white balance for shooting. Now you'll notice here that it moves the temperature to a different setting, in this case 5500, which is exact daylight in the Kelvin scale. Now you don't need to know a lot about those numbers yet. That's something I want to say for my intermediate course. However, just know that the type of scene you are shooting in is kind of what you want to set your white balance to. So for example, if you're out shooting on a cloudy day, you could set this to cloudy. It makes your image a little bit warmer. And that's not to say that you can't use the cloudy preset white balance for a sunny day or just a regular daytime. If you like a little bit warmer images, that's fine to use that there. But you'll also notice on your white balance, it's changing the tint when you do these as well. If you want to take that tint change away, you could double click on it and set it back to like a 0 setting here. or you could actually manually dial that in. So if it looks a little bit green, you can add in some more magenta. In this case, there's too much magenta, so we need to add in a little bit more green, and I think actually a 0 setting works best for this particular image. Now, one other way that you could do this, let's just go ahead and change this back to as shot, is you can actually select this eyedropper tool, and what you want to do is look around the image to find something that's neutral. So you could find something that is absolute white or black or gray, and you'll notice when you move around there's an RGB percentage down there with some numbers, and they change as you move around. What I like to do is to get those numbers as close to each other as possible to make the image as neutral as possible. So you'll notice my numbers here are 26.7, 25.8, and 26.8. That's all very close, so what we're going to do is click on it. When you do that, you'll notice that the image changes here. Now, I typically like my images to be a little bit warmer, but this here is pretty neutral and very accurate to how the colors actually look that particular day. So that's a good starting point for where our white balance should be set. But if you disagree with the way this looks, you can edit it just a little bit to kind of dial that in to be more of your taste. You know, art and photography is very subjective, and like I said, I like warmer images, so I'm probably going to warm mine up at least to 5600 because I like that kind of a look in the image. And we'll do a quick before and after here, and you can see this was the image straight out of camera, a raw file with no edits whatsoever. And now we're dialing in this image very slowly and making sure it looks as close to reality as possible. See, I could go a little crazy with my white balance and turn it into this color, make it super warm. That's a little bit unbelievable, and it looks more like I poured some mustard all over the image. Or we can go to the cool setting, and it does make it feel a little cooler. I mean, it was shot in the winter time, so that's okay, but I don't really like that blue looks. So just remember to be a little subjective with your images because it is your taste. This is your image, but you also want to try to keep it subtle and neutral. And that's pretty much all you need to know about the white balance section. It can seem a little overwhelming at times, but for the most part, it's pretty easy to work with. It's a lot of fun, and you can create some great stuff from here.